What's up, guys? So, I have been uploading on this channel for a very long time. And as I've been uploading on this channel, you guys have seen sporadic content. But I have fixed that over these past couple of months. And that's fine. Everybody goes through their little thing, they try to figure out what they want to do. And it takes them a long time to finally get into their groove and finally do it. I tried daily uploads, didn't happen. It happened for like a month back in the day, and then I just couldn't. And then I tried just uploading every once in a while. It was fun, but I really wanted to get back into YouTube. So then I tried doing every other day uploads, and it worked. It was perfect. So I'm happy with that. Now, the reason why I'm doing this video, and the reason why it's called My Story and the future of this channel, is because my here, let me just I'll tell you guys this from the beginning. Now, don't be alarmed. I'm still going to be uploading. I'm still going to be streaming, hopefully. And I'm still going to be over at Kyoto Esports doing my thing. But there is a lot that I got to share with you guys. And it's a very bumpy ride. Let's just say that. Okay, so this all started when I was about 15, 14, right around there. And I was a freshman in high school. So I was in my hometown, and I was just a little freshman. I was still tall. I was like 5'10", maybe 5'11", still growing, and life was pretty good. I had my parents. They were together. We were living in our own house, and we just moved to a different house too, and we've already been there for like a year, so it was pretty cool. But as time grew on, I kind of noticed a little bit of a separation between my mom and my dad, and this is normal for a lot of you guys out there who have gone through these types of things. But I just want to share it from my point of view. So about a year in, I would say, if I'm remembering right, because this is a long time. So I'm 23 now. My parents got a divorce, and it hit me like a ton of bricks because I had never experienced anything like this. I was fortunate enough to, until I was 15 years old, have my parents together, because not a lot of people can have that. A lot of people's parents split up when they were like very young. They don't know what's going on, or if they do know what's going on, it doesn't last very long. And then they finally they get used to it as time goes on. But when you're a freshman in high school, and you're so used to this way of life where you have your parents to lean on, and you have your parents to be there all in one area, um, you get used to it, and it becomes just a normality for you. But my parents, I remember this. My parents got me. I believe I was in my room, and they said, "Hey, come over here and sit on the couch. We need to talk to you guys." So I was thinking, "Oh, we might be going on another camping trip or something," but I was wrong. So my parents sat me down. I was next to my brother, my little brother Ethan, and then Benny was right over on my right, sitting in the recliner. And they said that they wanted to get a divorce, or that they were getting a divorce. And it hit me like a freight train. So I didn't know how to take it. I was tearing up, as a 15-year-old would do. I was confused. I thought it was my fault, as every little kid thinks that it is when this kind of thing happens, because they want to put the blame on somewhere. They don't want to put the blame on their parents because they love their parents. They want to put the blame on themselves because they think that they did something, that they're at fault, and that wasn't the case in any means. It's just how it usually happens when you have a relationship and you've been together for a long time. You want something new. You want something fresh. You tend to kind of drift away from your other side, from your husband, from your wife, from your girlfriend, from your boyfriend. You tend to drift away from them. So that's what happened here. And me being 15 years old, I didn't really, I didn't have that grasp in my mind, because I'm so used to having girlfriends every once in a while. I'm used to them coming and going. But when I see marriage, I see long term. And they were together long term. They were together for 15 years, which is insane. 15 to 10, around there. It was a long time. So I was obviously upset. So I went into my safe zone, which was out in the woods, out in this little clearing that I made a long time ago. I would say a long time ago, probably like a year when we got into that place. So about a year later, I went to that clearing, and I sat down and I cried. And I cried and I cried and I cried. And I sat there for like an hour. And it was the only thing that I wanted to do. I didn't tell my parents where I was going. I just kind of got up, got out of my door, and just ran. And I wanted to get away from the situation as fast as possible because I didn't want it to be true. And that's, I think a lot of people can relate to that because you want to get out of a situation that you don't want to be in. And you want to just assess everything on your own. Give yourself time to grieve, give yourself time to process everything that just happened. So I did that. And my parents were looking for me. You know, they got in their car. They thought I was in town. Then when I got home, they weren't mad at me. They were just concerned about me. And I think that really hit home because I thought I was going to be in trouble, but I wasn't because they understood that I was upset and they wanted, they knew that I needed space, but they kind of wished that I told them where I was going, and I understand that. But being young at the time, not caring what was going to happen after hearing that news, but not caring what was going to happen to me, just wanting to get out of there, there was no way in hell I was going to tell them where I was going. Just from my state that I was in. So that happened, and they didn't really get a divorce. They just separated because they didn't want to go through all those papers. So technically, they're still together by law, but they separated. It's kind of like a mutual understanding. After all of that, I was understandably upset. This was during the summer, so I didn't have to go to school. I didn't have to think about this while I was in school, and that was kind of a relief. I could just take my own time to think about things. I was upset, and it was getting hard to really digest it because my dad was living with his brothers at the time, my uncles, just so he could find a house and all that good stuff. And he eventually did. He found a house down the road from my brothers, which is nice because they were close together. I was about to start freshman year, and I really didn't want to be home right now. I wanted to get away. I wanted to think, and the only way I could do that was to get away. So I decided to go and move in with my grandparents, and it was a pretty ballsy move because I was going 45 minutes away from my hometown, 45 minutes away from everything that I knew, everything that was familiar to me, and going into new territory. And this new territory consisted of about 4,000 kids at this new school. And it was pretty intimidating. But when I talked to my parents about this, I was expecting them to say no because um, it's just like something that I didn't think was going to happen. It's just a shot in the dark for me. That, I wanted to get away and all that good stuff. But they understood. And this shocked me because I didn't think they were going to let me go to an entirely different town because I was 15. I wasn't like 18. I wasn't moving out or anything. So this took me by surprise, and I was blown away that they were going to allow me to do this. I knew that I needed to, and it was. I feel like this was the only way that I could really get away from it all and kind of get my head back on straight and get a different perspective on what was going on. So we did it. I went to my grandparents' house. My uncle was living with them because he had to watch them because my grandmother had dementia, or was having the beginning signs of dementia, and my grandpa had Parkinson's, and it was different. I didn't like when I went there to live with them, um, I didn't understand how bad my grandfather's Parkinson's were because every time I'd go visit them, he was looking all right. Of course, he was hunched over because his spinal cord was very weak, which is normal for Parkinson's patients. And but he was going upstairs. He didn't even have his walker at the time. He was going upstairs, going downstairs just fine. Of course, he was a bit slow, but it was what I was expecting. And it's crazy because I don't remember a time when my grandfather didn't look like that. Because I was so young when I was always seeing him, and it didn't really like click in my head of what he looked like before he had Parkinson's. But I digress. So we went there, and it was a different experience. I got to, I really got to connect with my uncle a lot, and he was a really cool guy. He had a Mazda, which was really like I thought that was the coolest thing ever because a Mazda was a sports car, and it was fast. It was crazy. So I would always go with him out to these nice landmarks, go to the river, and spend time with him. Go to see him at his place of work, see what he did, how he did it. He was a video producer for a church, which was pretty neat. And he would run all the ceremonies and stuff that would go on there. And he was head of the whole production crew, which blew my mind. It was like he was a movie star to me. But I got to spend time with him, and I got to spend time with my grandparents too. And while I was up there, I enrolled to the school, the new school, the big scary monster that it was, because I didn't know anyone there. I was totally on my own as far as school goes, but I made friends, and it was a really humbling and down to earth experience, because I'm so used to being at my small town where I had 500 classmates in one building, and it was insane just going from 500 classmates to 4,000 in one building. There were two stories. It was a two story. It wasn't two stories back in my old school, but there were two stories here. There were two football fields. One was a practice field. One was an actual football field. There was a track. I don't think we had baseball fields. So we had all that stuff. We had it was like a Chili's or something right next to the school with a giant plaza. Across the street was a pharmacy. It was like everything was there. Not to mention it wasn't too far from my house, but it was farther enough to where I didn't really want to walk, so I took the bus. But it was awesome. I made the basketball team out of about 75 people, I want to say, that tried out. I made it, and it was like one of the most awesome experiences that I've ever had, because I didn't think I was going to make it. I had confidence going in, but during the time when they were cutting people and they were seeing who made it, who didn't, I didn't think I was going to be on that list, but I was. And my dad was so proud of me, because I went from tryouts that had probably 14 to at most 16 people trying out to 75 in a bigger city. So it was nuts. And when I finally made it, first thing I did, I called my dad, because I knew he was going to be hyped about it, because I was talking to him about this, and he was, and we were very happy. So during the basketball season, we went to many different inner city schools, competed, or I should say, played against the other teams. We had a really good record. I believe it was like 12-2 at the end. And I got some minutes. I was a freshman going into like a junior varsity environment, and I wasn't getting many minutes, but I was getting some to where I was getting experience. And my dad would come to as many games as he could, so would my mom, and it was crazy. It was just so cool, just competing in such a different environment. And after a while, after the season ended, and I was getting homesick. I'll admit it. I was talking to my mom, and at the very end of the season, at the last game, I went up to my mom and I'm like, I want to go home. I want to move back home. I feel like I've had enough time away from it all to where I understand the situation better, and I have a clear picture of what went on, um, how I can deal with it going forward, and just get back on the horse and just get back into it. And my mom was looking at me. She was like, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Yeah." And this was something that I felt like I needed. This was an experience that brought me down to earth, that made me feel that I could take on anything. And it just felt good. It felt good getting away from it all. And I knew that my friends missed me, and I knew that my mom missed me, my dad missed me, because as soon as it happened, we decided to have me move out and come back to come back to school about 6 months into the schooling period. So it was a bit different. I had to go back into my classes, but it was fine, because all the stuff that I did over there, all my grades got transferred over, because there were some different classes, but pretty much all of the classes were the same. We did that. I went back home. I got back into the role. I think I got back onto the. I think when my basketball season was done, my the basketball season back at home was still going on. I want to say, I think I got back into it. I can't remember, but because it was so long ago. But we did it. We got back home, and it felt right. I felt like I was doing okay. It felt normal again, as normal as it could get, because my dad by this time had his own place. Um, my mom stayed the same place that we were before, so it was different, that's for sure. And during my time home, my mom was getting new boyfriends. She was trying out the dating scene, seeing how it was like. I didn't, I wasn't fond of one, but that's okay. He was never mean to anybody. It was just me not being open to the situation because it was so different. So eventually, I got back into the swing of things. Come sophomore year, junior year, it was we were all good, and then senior year, I graduated, and it was such a crazy experience, not having to worry about being in school anymore, just having all that weight lifted off my shoulders. It was a really cool and humbling experience. So I urge you, anybody who's watching right now, go through school, go through the grind, graduate. You're gonna feel like $1,000,000 when it's done. Not to mention you're gonna have that high school diploma to fall back on and to get jobs with, because it's the basic thing that you need to get started in your working career is a high school diploma. You could pretty much get a job anywhere in retail with a basic high school diploma and be fine. Then obviously you go to college, you get a degree in what you want, all that good stuff. Which kind of brings me to my next thing. So when this was done, when we graduated, my mom decided to move in with her boyfriend, and during this time, she was still paying for the old house that we lived in, and this has been like probably I want to say 3 years now that we've lived in this house. I think it's so hard to remember all these past things, but it's been about like 3 years that we lived in this house, and my mom decided to go live with her boyfriend after we were all graduated, so we were all fine. It was a different experience because me and my brother were living on our own, and it was crazy. So we were living on our own. I decided to get a job at good old McDonald's, Mickey D's, and it was a pretty interesting experience. Wild. And I stayed there for probably like a month or two, and I got sick of it, and I quit. Me being like a young age, I didn't really care that I was burning bridges and not providing a good source for a reference on my future applications. But I was okay. I didn't really care at the time. But college time rolled around, and I was excited. I was excited and nervous. Nervous partly because it was such a new environment. I was gonna have to meet new people, but nervous because I didn't have my license yet, and I needed to get it. That's for sure. But when senior year passed after the graduation, my uncle died, and this was my uncle Andy I was talking about earlier. My uncle passed away. He had a history of he had a history of heart problems. I think it was like heart palpitations. He had a heartbeat monitor in his chest, or whatever you call those things, and he was always going to checkups, saying if he was okay. He was able to walk around, drive, do whatever he wanted, except for like high activity things. So he passed away, and it was hard on my grandparents. That's for sure. My grandmother was at a point where her dementia was starting to get a little bit worse, so she was reliving this experience because we always had to either let her know or she'd remember on her own over and over and over again. And it was one of the hardest things that we've ever had to go through because during this time, we had an empty house, and we had an empty house with nobody else to fill it except for me and my brother and my friend Kenny at the time, and he still lives with us. Kenny does. So my mom came to us and she asked, "Would you want to watch Grandma and Grandpa? Because if we don't, then they're gonna go into a nursing home. Um, because there'd be nobody to watch them. Because on top of my grandfather's Parkinson's, he's handicapped, and then there's my grandmother's dementia, and those don't go hand in hand. So my grandfather, he couldn't really keep track of the bills because there's a thing with Parkinson's called Parkinson's confusion, and after a while, it builds up after all that pain that you start not to you're starting to not remember things accurately. Um, Kind of like with dementia, but very little like it. It was he could remember most things. He could keep track of everything, but every once in a while he'd get confused and ask the same thing every once in a while. But it wasn't nearly as bad as dementia. But my grandmother couldn't be a caretaker of his because of her dementia. She couldn't remember anything, and vice versa. My grandfather couldn't be a caretaker of my grandmother because physically he couldn't take her to appointments. He couldn't um, routinely help her with things because of his physical limitations. So we were at a crossroads where we needed to either take them in or make a difficult decision. And I think the reason why my mom asked me was because I lived with them and I got a feeling, I got a sense of what they were like, their daily routines, and their mannerisms, so on and so forth. So I had that experience. I had that experience going in. I knew what it was going to be like a little bit because I lived with them for 6 months. So I decided to say yes. I talked to my brother. He said yes too. We wanted to make sure that they didn't have to go into a nursing home for as long as they could, for as long as we physically could help it, and we did it. So we did the move. We went up to like we drove 45 minutes up there, back, and we made the move. And we helped them out. We brought them in, and it was a different environment. So my grandmother um, was a bit confused. She wasn't as confused as she would be later on down the road because the dementia hadn't gotten that bad. But she was a bit confused. But my grandfather was there to let her know that all the time that yes, we have moved. We are in a different spot, and you don't have to worry about anything. So it was good to have him there because my grandfather was my grandmother's anchor, day in and day out, and that probably weighed on him a lot too. With his Parkinson's, he was probably getting stressed, but knew that this was going to happen with the dementia. So he was stressed like I was, but I think he knew. So fast forward about a year later, my grandfather still thinks he can drive. My grandfather was stubborn, that's for sure. Um, he still thought he could drive, and he would always tell me, "Hey, where are the keys?" Because we couldn't really let him drive. His doctor didn't really give him a doctor's note yet, but we didn't really want him on the road because of his physical limitations. So we would always argue back and forth about it, but every once in a while we would let him drive because his doctor hadn't given him that doctor's order. We were just concerned about him. So during that whole time, thankfully, he didn't crash into anybody. He was fine, but I think he eventually realized his limitations, and we eventually got the doctor's note saying that he couldn't drive, so he knew, and it was just kind of smooth sailing from there on, but not really. But eventually, his body starting to weaken. He was falling every once in a while, even though we were giving him all of his pills, all of his dopamine to help his body move. He was still falling, and it got to a point where my grandmother couldn't really keep helping him because of her mental limitations, and it was draining her body. Just staying up every night, most nights, I would say, just helping him go to the bathroom, all that stuff. It was hard because I had to help him too. I had to pick him up whenever he would fall down. Um, every time he was on the bathroom, he couldn't get up. I'd have to go and help him, and he would say that I'm sorry for this, but you can't be. I told him that you can't be. This isn't your fault. Just forget about the stereotypes of seeing of your grandson having to help you up and feeling weak because it's all because we're doing this because we love him, and I wanted him to know that. And he said, "Yeah, you're right." So I would help him. I would get him dressed every once in a while, and just we would just keep going on and on with this. So eventually, my grandfather got to the point where he was falling down most of the time. He couldn't keep his head up. He was resting a lot, so we took him into rehab, rehabilitation, where he could get proper care, and he could start getting back on his journey to getting a bit stronger and prolonging the inevitable. So it worked. Yeah, they did really well there, and I was surprised at the improvement when he got home. But me having to work all the time, my brother having to work all the time, and I just couldn't be there to provide that physical therapy that he needed, that he had in rehab. So he did progressively get worse again, and it got to the point where he had to go back in, and he had to go back into rehab. And my grandmother was getting worse at this time, and she knew that he was in rehab, but would every once in a while think that he was home. So it was a bit hard. I had to keep telling her, and repetition after repetition, keep telling her over and over and over again that he's in rehab. And with a dementia-ridden mind, sometimes things stick. With enough repetition, uh, routine, and whatever you tell them sticks every once in a while. So she would remember every once in a while, which is nice. It would help us out a lot, but it was pretty frustrating. And with human emotions, I think I was allowed to get a bit frustrated myself. But uh, he was in rehab for, I would say, probably 2 months, and his physical limitations were getting to him, and you could see it every time I visit him. He'd have to be in a wheelchair. He couldn't be in his walker. He'd fall down. He'd be stubborn. He'd get back up and try to walk again, and fall back down again. And they couldn't keep him in his bed because he just wanted to get up. He wanted to move around. He just wanted to get better. But eventually, I think he kind of found it in his mind that he just had enough. So he passed away, and that was probably one of the most shocking and hardest things in my life, because I had to watch my grandmother relive it over and over and over again. Even after the funeral, she would remember for a little bit. She would know something was off, but it got to the point where her memory started receding far back to where my grandfather was in rehab, and she would still think that he was in rehab, and we had to keep reminding her that he wasn't. But eventually, she just kept thinking that he was in rehab, and we just went along with it, just to help her mind, just so she didn't have to relive that over and over and over again. We decided the best course of action was just to go with it and say, yeah, he's in rehab. He'll be coming back in a week. And then, she'd be like, oh, okay. And then the next day, or in the same day, probably about 15 times, she would say the same thing. We had to keep reminding her. And eventually it got to the point where she was saying, you guys always say he's in rehab. And then she would get upset, and she would raise her voice, and I would have to calm her down. And eventually it got to the boiling point where I was getting upset too, because it was hard to grasp in my mind, even after about 3 years at this point, watching her and knowing her mannerisms and knowing what she was going to say. It was stressful, because it felt like anything that I was doing wasn't working. And it felt like I was just, I wouldn't say prolonging the inevitable, because I was just getting frustrated, very, very frustrated. So it was around this time where I was getting, where she was eventually getting to a point where she had to go into a nursing home. And this was recently. This was probably about 4 weeks ago that we were thinking about this, because I blew up one day, and I was, I yelled at her because I, I did, she was raising her voice at me. She didn't know what was going on. Not her fault, but I just mentally I snapped, and I was yelling at her, and I just couldn't. At that point, I knew that it was time that she go into extensive care, that she needed a place where she was getting 24-hour treatment, 24-hour assistance, because I couldn't do it. I didn't have my job at this point, because about a year ago, I had my job for 9 months, and it was at Walmart, and I enjoyed my job for as much as it was, but I had to keep missing work because I had to take her to doctor's appointments. I had to stay at home and watch them at certain points, and it was taking a toll on my work. And I wasn't communicating this very directly with the higher ups there. So, miscommunication leads to me getting terminated because I was missing work, and it sucked because I really enjoyed that income. I enjoyed the company when I was working there. It was it was hard, and this was during the time where my grandfather was still alive. So I got fired, and I was watching them full time, no pay. Just they were living off their social security. That's how we were paying the bills. I was paying for groceries at that time, but then eventually we all had to switch over to their social security because it took so much to watch them that I couldn't work, and I knew I couldn't work, and it was hard. I wanted to be independent. I wanted to have my own source of income, feeling like I was doing something for myself. So it sucked. Yeah, we had to take her into a nursing home, and that's where she is right now. She's in a nursing home. I am with my brother Kenny. I'm with my brother and Kenny. We're living in this house right now. It's going to be put up for sale soon, and I'm gonna go live with my dad. My brother's gonna go live with my mom. Just so because we couldn't have jobs during this. We had to watch her, so we have to get back on our feet, and they're gonna help us. And I think my brother, I think Kenny's gonna go live with his dad or something, because we couldn't save up to buy this house from them. And I really wish we could, but we couldn't. So that's what's happening now. I'm going to be moving with my dad soon, and the scenery is going to change. I'm finally going to have a job again. I'm going to have money coming into this, so I can get games for this channel. I can help out with my dad, and I can live my life. So it's been a long ride. I know this video is a long one, but I had to tell it. I had to tell it. It is currently 6:57 in the morning. I'm going to be calling my place of employment here soon, so I can get everything set up, and we can do everything that we need to do. Been a crazy 4 years. Been a crazy 23 years of my life. But I was able to make it so my grandfather didn't have to go into a nursing home. And that's what he wanted. He didn't want to go into a nursing home. And I was happy with that. He didn't want to go into rehab either, but it was better than a nursing home for him. And I made it so my grandmother didn't have to go into a nursing home most of her life. And probably these next 2 years she'll have to deal with it, but I did my job. I did what I wanted to do. I didn't get paid for it. I didn't want to get paid for it. It was my grandmother. It was my grandfather. I wanted to watch them after my uncle passed away. And I've already cried all my tears. So your boy is a dried up prune right now. And I was physically exhausted, mentally exhausted, and we needed to make this happen. And I'm happy that we did. It's a sigh of relief. It's this is probably one of the most happiest I've been in a very long time, because after all of that, after picking my grandfather up when he fell down, helping him dress, convincing my grandmother that everything was going to be okay every 15 minutes, every day. I'm okay. I can live, knowing that I helped my grandmother. 23 years old, still got my whole life ahead of me. But thank you guys so much for watching this. Thank you for bearing with me. Things are going to be a little sporadic as we move forward. But I want you to know that I'm still going to be here. We're still going to be making content. Content actually is probably going to be better. Now that I have the money to support this, now that I have the money to get my own car, I might even get my own camera. We can do some vlogging or whatnot. Go up to my local mall and just hang out and shoot the shit with my friends. get out and enjoy my life. After all these years, just enjoy my life with you guys, bringing you guys along for the ride, streaming, uploading every other day. It's going to be wild, and it's going to be so much fun, and I can't wait. Putting this chapter of my life behind me. This is new. I'm going into uncharted territory in my life, getting a new place, hopefully, getting my car back on the road, living my life. It's gonna be different, but it's gonna be worth it. It is worth it. So thank you very much for sticking with me all these years. We still have all these years ahead of us. We're gonna be uploading every other day. We're gonna be streaming every other day. Gonna be working at Kyoto. It's gonna be crazy. So thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time. See you later.